I've been dealing with a lot lately. It seems like everything I do, I just make my own life and the lives of those around me worse. This is the lowest point I've ever been at in my entire life. I've disappointed every person who has ever loved or believed in me, and I've just proven them all wrong and pushed them away from me. I never intended it to be like this, but I haven't led a perfect life, and now I'm dealing with the repercussions. I live alone in my apartment, which I'm about to be evicted from, and I just found that out last week. This is officially my rock bottom, and every part of me has to change. I can't live like this anymore. Last week I was absolutely desperate, and I've tried praying to God recently, but I just haven't felt any connection, and it hasn't helped me at all. I've never been a believer in anything paranormal, or like God or Satan or any of that kind of stuff. But lately, I feel like I'm throwing Hail Marys and need some sort of energetic savior to come to my aid. I can't do this on my own. My way is not working. I'm ashamed to admit it, but last week I was enraged at God, and I blamed him for my life and my circumstances. One night, in a moment of desperation, I begged Satan to take my soul and to change my life in return. I don't think I even specified how. I just begged him to make it different and just screamed, cried, and begged him to take my soul and that I would do anything for some changes in my life. After that, the whole night is kind of hazy. After screaming that, things just seem different. I don't really know how to explain it, but something in me is different. I think I made a deal with the devil, and something really changed deep in my soul. I only remember moments of the entire night after that, but I remember I wrote lots of things down on multiple pieces of paper, and I signed them. Then I remember taking all the papers and forcing myself to throw them into the fireplace and light them on fire. Then I remember turning all the lights off and dancing around the fireplace and chanting and singing words to a song I've never heard before. I'm not sure it was even in English. And I was dancing and beating my chest and contorting my body all over the place as if I was purging the soul that I had out of my body. When I woke up the next morning, I was in an even worse mental state, and that's when I thought it didn't work, and I remember being devastated. But then some really strange things started happening, and now they won't stop. The first thing that happened was my girlfriend came over. We have a lot to talk about lately, and the relationship is definitely on its way out, and it's all my fault. As soon as she came in, she stopped and looked around and said something about there being weird energy in the room. Now, my girlfriend is all about crystals, incense, meditation, and all that. She's always talked about the energy in my apartment being calm and centered, whatever that means. For her to come in the morning after I made my deal with the devil and claim that the energy was weird really freaked me out. She only stayed for 5 minutes and then screamed that she had to get the hell out of there. I haven't seen or talked to her since, and I've been calling her obsessively, begging her to talk to me. I kind of thought it was just because of the relationship issues we've been having, but a lot more weird things have been happening lately. A friend of mine came to check on me a couple of days ago. We ordered me a pizza since I can't afford anything to eat, and we were just sitting around talking. He went to use the bathroom, and all of a sudden, he ran out of my apartment and called me about half an hour later. I had to keep telling him to calm down because I could understand what he was saying, and then finally I could understand him. He told me that a man was in the bathroom smiling at him. When I asked what man he was talking about, he just started freaking out and saying that I had to get out of there over and over again. It was one of the most unsettling conversations I've ever had. Now the cabinets and doors having been opening and slamming shut on their own. I keep seeing black figures out of the corner of my eye, and when I turn to look, there's nothing there. There's this black cat that comes to visit me that I feed out my window who usually loves me, and now he won't get anywhere near me. I feel like I'm going insane, and I don't know what to do. Now I think that demonic possession is real, and I actually sold my soul to the devil. Anyone that I used to be able to talk to, I've pushed out of my life and can't get a hold of. I feel like I have nowhere left to turn, and the devil is possessing me more and more. He's winning the battle, and I don't know what to do. I went to get some fresh air this morning, and there's this church nearby who had their door open. I figured it was a sign from God, so I made my way towards the church. But when I got near it, I got the worst headache and got sick. Can anybody help explain what is happening to me? What the heck is wrong with me? I grew up in Tampa, Florida, and have always been fascinated by the unexplained. My parents instilled a hard work ethic and taught me to always be observant to get ahead in life. As a self-proclaimed paranormal expert, I have always kept my eyes peeled for anything out of the ordinary. As the owner of a small computer store in town, I noticed a sudden decline in business. At first, I thought it was just a rough patch or the state of the economy. However, as time went on, I became more and more convinced that something strange was going on. Customers were no longer coming in, and my profits were dwindling. I knew I had to investigate the situation and find out what was really going on. It all started when I noticed the owner of a competing computer store across town seemed to always be one step ahead of me. No matter what promotion or sale I offered, he had a better one. It was as if he knew exactly what I was planning before I even did. I found this strange but didn't think much of it at the time. It may sound obsessive, but I began to investigate him and his store and watch his every move. The more I watched, the more convinced I became that there was something seriously fishy going on. His behavior was strange, and there were some things that just didn't add up. For one thing, he never left. Ever. It was as if he lived there full time. I never once saw him leave. He didn't go to lunch. He didn't go home after work. It seemed like he was in that shop working 24/7. As I continued my investigation, I noticed more and more strange things. He would often have secret meetings with shady-looking people in the back of his store, and there were times when his eyes seemed to glow in a strange way. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I knew something was off. I didn't involve anyone else in my investigation, as I didn't want to risk anyone thinking I was insane. However, I did confide in my spouse about my suspicions, and they were supportive but skeptical. I guess it was understandable, but through thick and thin, your spouse is supposed to have your back. As time went on, my fear and anxiety increased. The more I uncovered, the more convinced I became that the owner of the competing store was up to something nasty. I had to uncover the truth, no matter what it took. I began to do some research on the strange occurrences and behavior I had witnessed. I eventually came across some information that led me to believe that the owner of the competing store was a lizard man. According to my research, there are lizard men in elite circles such as the Illuminati, and it all started in the late 20th century. They seem to have gotten their powers from the ancient Sumerian deity Enki, who is often depicted as a serpent or reptilian figure. Lizard men and reptilian humanoids are often members of elite secret societies like the Illuminati and are said to secretly control world events. Lizard men are not only real, but are also involved in a global conspiracy to subjugate humanity. There is tons of evidence online of the shape-shifting abilities of some world leaders and the prevalence of reptilian symbolism in popular culture. There are many who dismiss this as pseudo-scientific or paranoid delusions. But standing right in front of me was a lizard man with glowing eyes, and he was stealing my livelihood. After uncovering all this information, I confronted the owner of the store and accused him of being involved in some sort of conspiracy. He told me I was crazy and called the cops on me. The cops questioned me, but I told them I was just looking to strike up a partnership with another computer store in the area and that he was just trying to make his competition look bad. Turns out what I said to get out of a bind was, in fact, completely true. He hired people to leave negative Yelp reviews for my store and tarnish my good name, and who knows how much it has cost me. Some of my customers have told me that every time they go into his store, he is talking about how my business is a front for illegal activities, and he tells people that I'm involved with a satanic cult. I couldn't believe that someone could be so ruthless and cruel. I finally decided to take action. My friend agreed to take his phone in there and record what the guy said. He casually asked the store owner if he knew anything about my business, and the hateful lies that spewed out of his mouth were outrageous. After having him on tape slandering my good name and my business's name, I gave my evidence to my lawyer, and we were able to reach a sizable settlement, and the man has moved elsewhere and taken his shady ways out of my beloved community. I also reached out to other business owners in the area and warned them about him, his creepy secret society, his slanderous ways, and how vulnerable we are to these lizard men. It wasn't easy, but eventually I was able to take him down and bring justice to Ybor City and have rebuilt my reputation slowly but surely. Looking back on this experience, I feel a mix of emotions. On the one hand, I'm proud of myself for standing up to this lizard man and fighting for what I believe in. On the other hand, I'm still haunted by the thought that there are people out there who are willing to do whatever it takes to get ahead, even if it means hurting others. This experience has taught me to be more vigilant and aware of the world around me. It has also shown me that even the most seemingly absurd theories can have some basis in reality. But most of all, it has given me a renewed sense of hope and confidence that I can overcome any obstacle if I remain true to my values and work hard. One word of wisdom, friends: beware the lizard men. They are real, and as good as I feel these days, I constantly feel like I shook up a hornet's nest, and it's just a matter of time before he gets his fellow lizard people to strike me down. I was a scoutmaster for 10 years. I'm not sure if that's something people care about anymore, but it's true. That was a big chapter of my life. It might be dorky or unflattering for me to admit, but I have a lot of fond memories from those times. The bond you develop with your peers, your pupils, and the world around you, nothing can replace that. Retirement suits me, don't get me wrong, but sometimes I do miss it. Kids, at least until a certain age, always smiled their brightest when they were in the Scouts. Working with them made them feel respected, capable, and brave. Those are the feelings we all want, aren't they? Those feelings are the reasons why I never told any of my Scouts this story. I didn't want them to know that our little organization, just like any other, was absolutely fragile when compared to the strength of nature itself. There's an island in the Northeast where we'd take graduating Scouts for one final hike before sending them off on their life journeys. Prior to those big hikes, scoutmasters like myself would be asked to visit the island. We'd check for dangers, clean up any debris left behind by adventurous partygoers, and generally prepare the island for visitors. That was my assignment the week I met it. Aside from snakes, raccoons, and the occasional fox, the island we visited was never dense with predators. That was the belief, of course, right up until my encounter. I was packing up for the night. I was lighting the oil lamps, heating a kettle in the kitchen, and changing out of the beige uniform that had defined my recent years. Then I heard something like thunder. I knew where it came from. The shore. That was where my boat was docked. I rushed outside to see what the noise could have been. I expected to see an accident of some kind. I thought there'd be another boat, splintered up against the ridge that marked the western edge of the beach. Instead, I found my own boat in pieces. Drag lines led from the place where I'd tied the vessel to the place where the boat was torn apart. Shards of wood poked out of the sand and created a path from the beach to the brush. Massive indentations followed the debris like footprints the size of tree trunks. I was in awe. I couldn't believe it. There was no storm overhead that could have racked my boat. There were no other people here, no saboteurs lurking in the woods. If they had arrived, I'd see their own vessel floating in the water. I followed the tracks with my flashlight, finding a hobbled sense of comfort in the memory of the radio that sat in pristine condition back at the cabin. Even if I didn't have a way off of the island myself, I could easily call for help. The tracks got harder to follow as they began to weave through the trees. Whatever I was chasing, it appears that the owner of those footprints had turned sideways in order to navigate the forestry. It looked as though it was strafing, walking shoulder first. Was it so big that it couldn't fit in the woods naturally? If that was the case, why couldn't I see it yet? Why couldn't I hear it? Thankfully, my other senses came to the rescue. I smelled it before anything else. Deep and wet and heavy, it smelled like the edge of the waterline. It smelled sour, salty. It burned my nose like I was breathing in the water itself. I almost choked. I only stayed quiet because my eyes jumped to the source of the odor. My gaze leapt ahead of me, and that's when I saw it. Two massive eyes the size of oranges, staring at me, unblinking. The beam of my flashlight shined in its wet irises. Its head was twice the size of my own. Its mouth stretched wide, similar to a toad or a catfish. But its skin and its body looked human. Its flesh was a tender pink, scabbed and scarred by the wilderness. It looked human except for its massive size. Its massive frame forced it to lean forward. The creature's knuckles sunk into the dirt. As I watched it, it stepped closer. Its gait was slow and cautious. I saw that its feet were short, stunted like a hoof, and when it opened its mouth, it bellowed. It droned. Its cries shuddered out from its chest. My legs and my bones shook immediately. All I could do was turn and run. I don't remember when, but at some point I dropped my flashlight. I ran in the dark. I knew where to go. I knew where the cabin was. I knew where the radio was. But the beast wasn't gone. I heard its footfalls like hammer blows behind me, slamming into the earth like every branch was a nail that needed stomped flat. The monster was chasing me. I was thankful for its massive stature. It was too big to run at its full speed, I'm sure. I don't know how it got to that island, but I'm sure in hindsight that it wasn't the monster's home. I heard its shoulders thudding into the trees. I heard the birds scatter and shriek overhead. Thud, thud, thud. With every slam, I thought the next deafening impact would be the sound of its giant hands slapping against my back. I imagined its fists raining down on me, but then, suddenly, I was home. I was in the cabin. I was locking the door and looking through the window, relieved that there was no sign of the creature. I reached for the radio, pleaded for help, and got out of there as soon as I could. No one believed what I saw, but they did cancel that hike. Our organization never returned to the island, and I promised never to tell this story. It's frightening, isn't it? It's frightening to know that there might be things lurking out there that none of us expect to find, but the older I get, the more I've reconsidered. Maybe this story can be useful. At the time this happened, I was working as a local journalist in my hometown of Troy, Michigan. In 2014, the editorial team asked me to follow a story from Detroit. Normally, I would jump on any opportunity to head out, but that time, I had a strange feeling about it. Part of it was due to my uneasiness driving after my shoulder surgery, and partly due to knowing that Route 75 is said to be a paranormal magnet. I was pacing outside my boss's office, thinking of an excuse to not go, and noticed my coworker Frank packing up his desk. He was moving to another job outside of Troy, and that meant that my chance for a promotion was maybe finally here. So, with that in mind, I decided to swallow my anxiousness and take on the story. I called my dad and asked if I could take his car. "Detroit?" He said. "Well, I can come along and I'll stop at your Uncle Sean's place." I cringed from the inside, but agreed. We don't have much in common. I am timid and antisocial. He's outspoken and loud. However, I really wanted the Detroit story to help me with the promotion, and the road trip would probably mean a lot to him too. Neither of us had any commitment after work, so we headed out right afterwards, straight down Route 75. He tried to churn up some conversation, but I was tired and wanted to be fully awake the next morning, so I started to nod off in the car. Detroit is not far from Troy, but every second felt like an hour. I do not remember when I actually fell asleep, probably when Dad started telling stories of a strange creature that had been seen lurking near Troy at night. Maybe I should have been paying attention to this part. Not soon into the trip, I heard a loud thud and hit my head on the car window I was leaning towards. "Hey, are you up?" my dad said. "I think I saw something." "Probably it was nothing," he whispered. I shook my head no and just answered in murmurs. It was dark, and we were no longer on Route 75. I remember making frustrating remarks, but his attention was completely somewhere else. His hands were gripping the steering wheel tightly. "You were asleep. There was an accident on Route 75, and I knew a way to bypass it over here by the fairgrounds and the cemetery. Well, I thought I did." I rolled my eyes as I reached into my pockets to open the map on my phone. I tried to unlock my phone but realized it was completely dead. I was so fixated on reaching Detroit that it had slipped my mind to charge it before leaving. The car kept moving along, but then it seemed to slow down. I opened my eyes wider and turned towards my dad to see his eyes open wider and stare at the rearview mirror. I still remember the look on his face with his jaw hanging down. He kept driving ahead slowly, but his eyes were glued to the rearview mirror. Not knowing what was going on, I asked him to let me drive. While Dad kept asking strangely and not stopping, I asked him again to stop the car and switch seats with me. He was hesitant at first, but finally agreed. I got out of the car, and soon after getting out, a noise from off in the direction of the cemetery caught my attention. I was looking around to find the source. I scanned the horizon looking for whatever it was, and what I saw was nothing like I could have ever imagined. It was a dark-haired, furry, wolf-looking creature, but it was huge in size, as big as a fully grown horse. I squinted my eyes, thinking it was a play of the light, but the bright yellow eyes that were staring back into mine were definitely real. Even though the creature was at least a few hundred feet away from us, his incredible size was clearly noticeable. Its presence behind our stopped car looking towards us was something I could feel. I'll never forget the feeling I had when I first looked at it. It was majestic and had a sense of undeniable power. I felt it could make anyone feel shivers down their spine and make their hands quiver, just like how I felt at that moment. However, I am a journalist, so I decide I can capture this beast with my camera and show people what I saw. I slowly moved my hand, reaching for the door handle while also reaching for my camera. In my head, I was moving slowly enough that I wouldn't be noticed by the creature who was still a decent distance away. Unlucky for me, I was wrong. The beast howled a cry at the most unbelievable spectrum and rose up on its two back feet. Its muscled body was now at least 9 feet tall, and its dark fur made it seem even more ominous and horrifying. However, the strangest part of this vision was the creature's human-like build. The only typical wolf features were the tail, the sharp set of paws at the end of each limb, and the snarling wolf head. By this point, my dad had jumped inside the car to the passenger seat, and I had moved across to the driver's side. He quickly helped me open the driver's seat's door and yanked me inside and yelled to hit the accelerator. At first, I was in shock, but he pushed my knee and slapped me to my senses. I shut the half-open door and pressed the pedal to its limit without even looking back in the rearview mirror. My hands were gripping the steering wheel white-knuckled and were still shaking as I drove away and tried to process what had just happened in these longest minutes of my life. My father saw it too, and he knew what he saw but could not verbally acknowledge it. But as far as I am concerned, I hope it's the first and last time I catch a glimpse of the notorious Dogman of Michigan. I live in northern Minnesota, less than 100 miles from the Canadian border. I didn't grow up here. I was from the Twin Cities originally. Worked an office job for nearly 2 decades and finally decided one day I had enough. I wanted to be closer to nature, so I got myself a job out in the middle of nowhere and moved. Most of my friends and family thought I was crazy, but I did my best to explain my reasons. I had been experiencing some back pain from working a desk job, to which my doctor recommended I take up walking every day. I did. Walking turned into hiking, and I spent more and more time in the woods. Now, I'll say this, the woods in the lower part of Minnesota are a whole lot different than they are in the northern part of the state. I had wanted to live in a place where I could watch wildlife from my front window and where the horizon isn't obstructed by buildings. I certainly got that, but I ended up with a whole lot more than I bargained for. There isn't just the usual wildlife up here. There's something else. The locals don't like to talk about it too much, and those who do are written off as crazy. It seems they've just learned to live with them. It's easier that way, or so I've been told. I started noticing strange things just a couple of weeks after I moved in. One night I heard something moving around outside my window. It was around 1 or 2 in the morning. I remember looking over at the clock on my nightstand. All of the other incidents happened at night, around the same time. They seemed to be nocturnal. The animal sounded large. I assumed it was either an elk, a moose, or a bear. I got up and turned on the porch light, but I didn't see anything through the window, and I wasn't about to go out there and look. I went out there to check for tracks as soon as it was light out. I didn't find any signs of what the animal could have been, but I did find 3 large boulders stacked in a line just outside of my bedroom window. I immediately ruled out any animals we had around here. None of them could have done that. It had to have been a human, but the boulders were huge. No person could have moved them without a machine. I talked to a couple of different people in town about it, but no one gave me any answers. Their replies were short, and none of them seemed at all surprised, but they wouldn't discuss it further. I knew there was something they weren't telling me. I ended up buying some cheap trail cams and setting them up around my property. I had planned to do this anyway so I could see what animals were moving through, but the incident with the boulders sped up my decision. It wasn't until winter that I found something on the trail cam, but other strange things had been happening within that time too. Things would be moved around the property. And the strangest thing of all, I would find areas of the nearby forest populated by young saplings, with the saplings pushed together. The trees wouldn't be uprooted, simply all bent towards each other, forming something like a teepee. I would only find these teepees in the mornings after an extremely cold night. There were tracks around the areas, but they were muddled, and I couldn't get any idea of what made them. I set up one of the trail cams out in the woods before the next cold snap, hoping to catch whatever was making the teepees. I had all sorts of crazy theories by that point. I even thought maybe there was some group of recluses living out in my woods. When I saw the photos on the cam, it looked like a bear. It was hunched over near the trees and would stand up to push them together. The only problem was, bears around here hibernate during the winter months, and this was the absolute dead of winter. That, and the creature in the photos, had brown hair, and we only have black bears here, not brown. I'm not much of a hunter, but I had a gun in the house just in case I had a run-in with an angry black bear or a moose on my property. I went back out to check the area around the teepee for any additional signs of the bear. I found tracks, but again, couldn't make them out. It was as if the animal was trying to disguise its identity from me. I heard something moving behind me, and then I heard a growl. It wasn't the growl of a bear. It was something I had never heard before. I turned around, and just as I did, a tree came down almost right on top of me. I don't know if it was the animal pushing the tree down or the weight of the snow, but I got out of there as fast as I could. I'm planning on exploring more once I work up the courage. I really want to know what that was.